Have you ever noticed how almost everyone today is just tired? Not just physically exhausted after a long day, but deeply emotionally drained. We are looking at a massive, unprecedented global spike in anxiety, depression, burnout, and this heavy, lingering brain fog. For decades, society has treated this purely as a psychological issue. We tell people to change their mindset, to push through it, to do more therapy. But what if we have been looking at the wrong system entirely? What if the root of modern mental illness isn't just in our thoughts, but in our blood?
It sounds almost like science fiction, but it is quickly becoming medical consensus. We are in the middle of a massive paradigm shift. Emerging fields like neuroimmunology and metabolic psychiatry are uncovering something fascinating and, honestly, a bit unsettling. The inflamed body directly inflames the brain. We are starting to realize that a vast amount of modern mental suffering might not be purely psychological at all. It is profoundly biological.
So, if I am hearing this right, you are saying that the way we feel, our daily mood, our motivation, our ability to handle stress, could actually be dictated by our immune system?
Precisely. For a very long time, Western medicine separated the mind from the body. But think about inflammation for a second. We usually associate it with a sprained ankle or a cut on your hand. The area gets red, it swells, it hurts. That is an acute inflammatory response, and it is actually a brilliant, protective survival mechanism. It is your body's first responder team rushing in to repair tissue and fight off infection. The problem is not inflammation itself. The problem is when those first responders never go home.
Right, like a fire alarm that just keeps ringing in the background 24/7. And eventually that constant blaring noise starts to drive you crazy.
That is a perfect analogy. Modern humans are increasingly living in persistent, low-grade, systemic inflammatory states. And your brain, it turns out, is incredibly sensitive to that constant biochemical noise. When the body remains biologically activated for years, the brain cannot simply ignore it.
Which brings us to the obvious question, who keeps pulling the fire alarm? If we aren't constantly fighting off severe physical infections, why is our immune system so perpetually triggered? I have been reading a lot about the gut connection lately. Does the fire start there?
A huge portion of it does, yes. Let's look at the intestinal lining. It is supposed to act like a highly selective bouncer at an exclusive club. It lets the nutrients in, and it keeps the toxins, bacteria, and undigested food particles out. But modern life is essentially a relentless assault on that bouncer. We are talking about ultra-processed diets, chronic emotional stress, alcohol, sleep deprivation, and a completely disrupted microbiome.
So the bouncer gets exhausted, gives up, and just leaves the door wide open.
Exactly. The barrier becomes compromised. This is what we call increased intestinal permeability, or what is commonly known as leaky gut. Inflammatory substances leak into your systemic circulation. Your immune system sees these foreign particles in the blood, panics, and launches an aggressive attack. Suddenly, inflammation is rising throughout your entire body.
Okay, but how does a biochemical war in the gut turn into depression or anxiety in the brain? Because we were all taught in high school biology about the blood-brain barrier. I always pictured it as this impenetrable fortress wall that keeps the delicate brain perfectly safe from whatever chaos is happening in the rest of the body.
We all did. But the reality is far more dynamic than a solid brick wall. When your immune system is triggered, it releases inflammatory molecules called cytokines. Think of cytokines as urgent chemical text messages. We now know that certain cytokines can actually breach that fortress wall, or they can send signals right through it. When they reach the brain, they start altering everything. They interfere with your neurotransmitter systems like dopamine and serotonin. They alter your stress responses, your energy regulation, and even impact neural plasticity. The inflamed body literally changes the emotional brain.
Wow, so the brain is reading the panic signals from the gut and changing its own chemistry to match the crisis. That completely reframes how we think about mental fatigue. It is not just someone lacking willpower, it is the brain responding to inflammatory chemistry.
Yes, and this leads to one of the most mind-bending concepts in modern psychiatry, sickness behavior. Think about the last time you had a really severe flu. How did you feel emotionally?
Terrible. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I had zero motivation. I just wanted to hide under a heavy blanket and sleep in a dark room.
Exactly. You withdrew socially, your energy conservation went into overdrive, and your motivation plummeted. That is not a psychological failing, that is an evolutionary survival response. Your body is forcing you to shut down so it can use all its available energy to fight the infection. Now, what does that behavioral pattern sound like?
That sounds exactly like clinical depression.
Bingo. Certain forms of depression are now strongly associated with elevated inflammatory markers. The brain is interpreting chronic systemic inflammation as an infection. It thinks you are sick, so it triggers sickness behavior. The lack of motivation, the social withdrawal, the overwhelming fatigue, it is the body trying to survive a biological threat.
That is incredibly profound. It shifts the entire narrative from what is wrong with your character to what is attacking your biology. But it is also a bit tragic, isn't it? Because the threat isn't a virus we can just fight off in a few days. The threat is our everyday environment.
That is the tragedy of the modern metabolic storm. Our immune systems evolved to handle intermittent acute threats, a predator attack, a bacterial infection, a physical injury. They did not evolve to handle continuous, low-grade activation from sitting in a chair for 10 hours a day under artificial lights, eating hyper-processed synthetic foods, staring at stressful emails, and sleeping 5 hours a night. Modern civilization has changed the biological landscape dramatically.
We have basically built a zoo for ourselves that makes the animals sick. We are living in a profound state of environmental mismatch.
That is a very important perspective, and it is not just depression. Let's talk about brain fog. So many people today complain that they just cannot think clearly anymore. They cannot hold focus, they forget words, they feel mentally sluggish.
Yes, it is like trying to run a high-end software program on a computer that is severely overheating. Everything just lags.
And that overheating is cognitive inflammation. Inflammatory signaling impairs mitochondrial function in the brain. Mitochondria are the powerhouses of your cells. When they are strained by inflammation, your neural pathways literally slow down. Your neurotransmission becomes inefficient. The brain simply cannot sustain high-level cognitive processing when it is metabolically exhausted.
So modern exhaustion is biochemical just as much as it is psychological. It is a literal energy crisis in the brain. And I imagine the microbiome plays a massive role in balancing this out, right? Because the gut and brain communicate constantly through the vagus nerve.
Absolutely. The vagus nerve is like a high-speed fiber optic cable connecting your gut directly to your brain. And the microbes in your gut are constantly sending data up that cable. They influence immune signaling, they produce neurotransmitters, and they help control inflammation. If your microbiome is diverse and healthy, it sends signals of peace and stability. If it is disrupted, it sends signals of panic. The nervous system and the immune system are in constant dialogue.
So our emotional stability quite literally depends on our internal ecological balance. It really makes you wonder about the deep, almost philosophical cost of modern convenience. We traded whole foods for shelf life, movement for screens, and natural circadian rhythms for 24/7 productivity. And the price we are paying is our sanity. Our nervous systems are screaming at us to stop.
They are. And that is why the future of mental health cannot just be a conversation about psychology. Future psychiatry will increasingly integrate biology and metabolism directly. We are moving toward a world where treating depression or anxiety involves analyzing a patient's nutrition, their sleep architecture, their gut health, and their autonomic regulation. We will use AI-driven biomarker analysis and wearables, not just to count steps, but to track inflammation and stress in real time. Because wearables do not improve health on their own. The interpretation of that biological data does.
It is a total paradigm shift. We have to stop treating the mind as this abstract floating entity that is somehow divorced from the flesh and blood that carries it. The mind emerges from the body. You cannot heal the software if the hardware is on fire.
Beautifully put. We have to extinguish the fire in the body to clear the fog in the mind. The future of medicine will recognize that the mind simply cannot be separated from the physiology sustaining it.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. It really leaves you with a powerful realization. Perhaps modern mental suffering is not merely a weakness. It is not a lack of discipline or a failure of character.
No. Perhaps millions of nervous systems are simply inflamed. They are overloaded by environments that human biology was never designed to endure continuously.
A deeply comforting yet challenging thought to leave our listeners with. The inflamed body creates the inflamed mind. It is time we start treating both.